Hey, my friends, this is the art of prepping. I want to talk to you today about examples of gear brands that I see commonly in my area and that I have seen for a while now. And when I've traveled, and I haven't traveled recently a lot, but when I have, I kind of see the same thing over and over. And so I would assume that on some level, these are fairly common brands, regardless of where you went throughout the country. Now, I don't know about other countries. This is just for the US. So, maybe in your country, everything's completely different. But what I can say here is that when you look at police officers' duty gear, this stuff has been selected for a reason. It wasn't just because it was the cheapest, just because it probably works the best, at least the best that they were able to find at the time of procurement. So it's probably a starting point for us preppers to pay some attention to go, okay, so if the police officers are using this, why are they using that? And so it could be a starting point for research. Now, I'm not saying that you should buy whatever your local police department buys, because it may not be the best and it may not be the best for you. But what I'm talking about is for those who are just starting out and they don't really have a lot of time to research, or maybe they don't know how to research, then whatever that they can do, they can at least start with what the police officers have in their local departments and then branch from there. And so there may be brands that you are not aware of, and you can actually become more aware of them when you kind of pay attention to see what, your local law enforcement uses. Now, you may not be able to identify just by looking at, an item. You may actually have to go up to that officer in a very polite way and ask, hey, what type of flashlight is that? I'm looking for a good flashlight. Is that a good one? And maybe just strike a good conversation up. And this is always good to have good relations with your local law enforcement. And I'm sure that the average officer could spend a minute or two talking to you about the flashlight, if it's any good, pros and cons and things like that. I'm sure most officers wouldn't have a problem at all, talking about that. So it's just something to consider, is to look at the local resources. And this also goes for, fire and rescue, and if there's a military installation locally, and if you have like a neighbor that's part of that installation, maybe just strike a conversation up and say, hey, what kind of lights do you use? Or what types of blades, or what types of boots, or whatever. And we're going to get into some examples here. So talking about boots, that'd be the first thing on the list here that I kind of pay attention to. And there's certainly different brands of boots out there that I've seen. So this one was a little hard to just kind of pick one. And I'm just picking one just because it makes more sense on this, because actually this is the one that I see the most. But once again, there's definitely other brands. And the one I see the most in my area is Bates brand. And I don't see them, typically wearing the full length boots. It's more of like the quarter boots. And so I guess it's just a little more comfortable, and especially during the summer, it's more breathable. And so number two here is the duty holsters. Now, this one was really difficult. There was almost like a three-way tie in my area. So, maybe it's not so diversified in your area, but I've seen as many as 5 different brands, over the years, of paying attention to duty holsters. But in my area, it's almost a tie between Galco, Safariland, and Blackhawk. It just depends on what department. So there's that. Number 3 here is the sidearm. I mean, that's pretty important. If a department picks a firearm, it's got to be for a good reason. And if you see the same firearm being selected from department to another department to another, state police, sheriff, and local police all have the same firearm. Well, that says something right there. That says a lot. And so what I see in my area and when I've traveled, it typically has been a Glock 17. It doesn't always work out that way. I've seen some departments carry something different. But I'm telling you, it's like probably 60% or more of the police officers that I've seen over the years are carrying a Glock. And the other ones are either carrying a Smith & Wesson or a Beretta. That's just the ones that I've seen. And so the next would be blades or, various rescue cutting tools. And I was a little surprised by this over the years because I keep on seeing it and I'm like, I wonder why that is. I have a few theories, but I'm just going to tell you the brand, and that's CRKT. CRKT is really big in law enforcement and in military circles. And, you know, I'm not saying that Gerber isn't big in the military circles, because they are, and there's a few other brands as well. But I'm just telling you the ones that I've seen locally and in my region in terms of law enforcement is typically CRKT first and foremost by a large margin, and then Spyderco and a few other brands. In terms of eyewear, Oakley seems to dominate the market with law enforcement. I would say somewhere between 70 to 80% of law enforcement over the years were wearing Oakley. And then the others are wearing some, maybe like a Bolay or something else like that. But yeah, definitely Oakley dominates. Number 6 here is the Duty flashlight. Now, growing up, it was very common for an officer to have a mag light, and that was really the standard. I think that we all know that. No matter where you really were in the U.S., mag light dominated. But what I've noticed is in the last 15 or so years, maybe even a little longer, but definitely in the last 15 years, the flashlights, the Duty flashlights, have gotten smaller and more compact, and of course, obviously, you know, brighter, and they've switched brands. And so instead of Maglite, for the most part, I would say about 90% of the lights that I've seen over the years or recent years has been Streamlight, hands down Streamlight. So I think that's pretty interesting. And even talking to my local fire department, they use Streamlight as well for some of their search and rescue lights. So I think that's pretty interesting how Streamlight is not only just in law enforcement and then fire and rescue, but also in military, and they have a full line of civilian lights. It's overall fairly impressive. Number 7 is vehicles. This is really interesting because while sometimes, like in a parks department, you will find maybe like a Toyota, you know, a pickup truck or something. Typically, it's pretty rare, though, at least in my experience going into parks and my experience of paying attention to cruisers and just law enforcement vehicles in general. The majority of them are Ford. It seems like it's hands down Ford. And then if you see something other than Ford, it's a Chevy. And that is just kind of what I've noticed. So it's just something to take note of. Number 8 is radios. Now, for a number of years, I've been trying to pay attention to the brands of radios that when I go and travel or even locally, what are the radios that they're using. And I can't even remember a time that they were using a radio other than a Motorola. It seems like Motorola really dominates public safety radios. And I'm aware of other brands, but that's just what I've seen, you know. So I don't know where the other brands are in terms of what cities. Maybe I just haven't been to that city yet. But in terms of law enforcement and public safety in general, or even military, it seems like Motorola is there. Let's go ahead and now look at collapsible batons. And I want to preface saying that growing up, they didn't have any of that. It was all the old wooden ones, the fixed batons. And of course, you almost never see those anymore. And so it's very common to see pretty much almost any officer, every officer, at least in my area, is carrying some type of collapsible baton. And, you know, even though there's about a handful of makers of that particular type of product, you almost never see anything other than an ASP brand baton, an ASP brand collapsible baton. And that's probably for a good reason. They're made very well. They're very durable. They're very expensive, though. Very expensive. But apparently there's a difference. And so, yeah, I mean, I can't even really remember the last time I've seen any other brand but ASP. But I know that there's a few other brands that supposedly are being used, but I've just never witnessed it. Now, the next would be underclothing. This is kind of hard to know because obviously it's not really, you know, visible to a large degree, if almost at all. But sometimes I've seen officers kind of unbutton their top button and a little brand will kind of be somewhat visible of some underclothing. And just from what I've been able to see in the last few years here and there, it seems like Under Armour. Under Armour is a brand that's chosen for underclothing just to kind of wick away moisture, especially if you're wearing body armor. There's like a lot of people like to use material to wick away moisture so that you don't get a lot of moisture trapped between you and the body armor. Okay, and lastly here is going to be a non-lethal option. It used to be growing up that it was pepper spray or pepper foam, but of course currently the choice is pepper gel, hands down pepper gel. And Saber Red is pretty much all that I see that law enforcement carries. And so I'm aware of like about 4 other brands, but you just never, at least I've never seen them carried by law enforcement agencies. So there must be a real reason why Saber Red is chosen, because it's just, hands down by other departments. It's like state police, sheriff, local law enforcement. I've even heard of pretty much all of federal agencies gravitate toward that brand, at least in recent times. They may have changed. I don't know. I'm just saying that from what I've heard, it just seems like it's kind of a universally gone to, or it's the go-to brand for pepper gel. So anyways, I just wanted to highlight these brands because if you're into preparedness, it's just good to know what other people are using, especially in law enforcement, search and rescue, military, and so forth. And so pay attention to that if you kind of want a little bit of an idea of what other people are using. And it probably, for the most part, these things are good to go because they're tried and true, right? And I don't think that departments would be using all these things if they didn't work. So I would say that you have a pretty high chance of success, or you would have a pretty high level of having something that's going to be durable and probably maybe not high value, but something that will be worth the money. Because I know some of these brands and some of the models within the brands are not cheap at all. It's almost premium, but you kind of get what you pay for a lot of the times. And I think in law enforcement, when your life is on the line, these are tools that are life-saving tools. And so price really isn't an issue when it comes down to that. If you have to draw your weapon to save your life, then you don't care about price. You just care that you neutralize the threat to keep yourself safe and other people safe. And the same thing, it goes with other gear. So hey, thanks for checking the video out. You guys take care.